Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of Digital Fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and we're back at it with another spoiler video for Magic the Gathering's Edge of Eternity's expansion. And this one is actually another leak video. I thought that since spoiler season proper had officially begun with official spoilers from Wizards of the Coast, that we wouldn't be getting any more leaks. But lo and behold, there have been more. Another batch of cards were leaked, and I could have waited a few more days until maybe these came out officially, but I want to make sure and get every single card that's available out to you guys as soon as humanly possible. So I decided I will do another video. I'll deal with all of the most recently leaked cards that I haven't covered yet, and I will have another video coming later tonight that will be all of the official Day 2 spoilers, everything that's officially been released by Wizards of the Coast. So by the end of the day, given this video and that video later on, you should be able to have access to seeing every single known card spoiled for Edge of Eternities up until this point, up until Tuesday. So we're going to dive right in and cover these leaks. Most of these are in batches of 3, at least the commons and the uncommons, although we do have a few rares later on that we'll go over one at a time. But I want to kind of do these commons and uncommons in batches so that we can just kind of knock them out and get to the juicy stuff earlier. Before we dive in, please like the video. It helps me get it out to so many more people. It helps the channel grow, and it honestly means more than I can express with words. And be sure to subscribe if you want to see all of the spoilers as soon as they drop, or if you're interested in some crazy deck tech ideas I've got coming. All of that's on the way, so make sure to subscribe and let's dive right in. First off, we have a batch of 3 black cards. First up is Blade of the Swarm, a 3/1 insect assassin for 1 black and 3, and when this creature enters, you choose one. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on this creature, or put target exiled card with warp on the bottom of its owner's library. Kind of an interesting card, very easy to main deck in Limited, lets you come down as a 5/3 for 4 if you want, which is normally going to be the normal mode on this, right? A 5/3 for 4, which is honestly not that bad, but having this built-in way as an uncommon to just deal with your opponent's warp creature and not be able to, you know, make it so that they can't get it back from exile after they've warped it is going to be incredibly useful, I think, in Limited. I don't think this is aggressively costed enough to see, you know, to see play in Constructed in Standard or anything like that, but in Limited, I actually think this card's going to be really, really good. We also have Gravepack Monoist, or is it Gravpack Monoist? It's Gravpack Monoist, like Gravity Pack. A 2/1 human scout with flying for 1 black and 2, and when this creature dies, you create a tapped 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token. I actually think this is really good as a common. Getting a 2-power flyer for 3 mana is still evasion that you can swing in with every turn and maybe eventually seal the deal. And it's good that if they do happen to have removal that they waste on it, you get a 2/2 to replace it, or even if they've got another flyer in the air that you trade with, you get a 2/2 to replace it. It's kind of automatic 2-for-1 value, and it's got evasion. So as a common, I actually think this is pretty good and Limited. The last card here is Caesarean Voidburn, a 2/2 vampire soldier for 1 black and 2. It warps out for just 1 black though, and whenever this creature or another creature or artifact you control dies, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. It is kind of a bummer that it doesn't say leaves the battlefield, because it would be nice if this triggered when warping it in after it leaves and gets exiled at the end of your turn. It's still pretty good though. Every time you die, it's basically meant for, you know, a Sacrifice Aristocrat style deck. It's one of those win conditions. Everything that dies is going to drain from your opponent, except you have a way of warping it out a little bit cheaper, a little bit sooner, maybe getting some value off it a little bit earlier in the game, which is kind of cool. And it's also worth noting that it works for artifacts, which is huge because we've already seen a bunch of crazy artifact synergies that rely on sacrificing artifacts, especially yesterday's Day 1 video. If you guys haven't watched that yet, definitely check it out. I'm going to have a playlist in the description and in a pinned comment with all of the videos I've put out with all of the spoilers so far, because some of those spoilers are insane, some of the leaked spoilers are really nuts, so definitely check all that stuff out if you haven't already. There are a bunch of cards that want you to sacrifice artifacts already, and it looks like the Voidburn here is just another one added into the mix. It looks really cool, but let's move on. Next up, we've got Gravkill, 1 black and 3 for an instant, and you exile target creature or spacecraft. With all of the death triggers running around all over the place and tons of graveyard interaction, just having a straight up instant speed exile is pretty good. And I love that it can exile spacecraft, because you don't have to wait for them to, station it into a creature before you get rid of it. You can use the turn that you have the free mana to deal with the thing, because you're expecting it to eventually be a problem, which is really nice. We also have Temporal Intervention, a sorcery for 1 black and 2, and this is one that we saw in another video before, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but target opponent reveals their hand, you choose a non-land card from it, that player discards that card, but it has this void ability, so if a non-land permanent left the battlefield, or a spell was warped this turn, it's going to cost 2 less. Basically make them discard any non-land for just 1 black mana, and I do want to point out, it's a lot easier to trigger these void abilities than it might seem on the surface, because you can just get rid of something from your opponent's side of the board and still trigger the void. Your opponent could warp a spell and still trigger the void. It doesn't care about who's doing the warping or who controls the non-land permanent that leaves the battlefield. It just cares that something does, which is kind of interesting. The last card here is Dark Endurance, 1 black and 1 for an instant, costs 1 less to cast if it targets a blocking creature. Target creature gets +2/+0 and gains indestructible until end of turn. That's actually really, really good for 1 mana if you are being defensive, blocking something, looking to try to trade up and getting that extra power to do it while also not actually trading because of the indestructible is cool. But it's nice that you can pivot and use it on the attack, use it as a way to maybe just get in for an extra 2 damage and win outright, or at least protect your most vulnerable creature so that you can swing in with everything, keep your thing alive, maybe kill the thing they block with, and let something else get through that otherwise would have been blocked if you weren't able to attack with that creature. So a lot of cool tricks you can do with Dark Endurance. I'm liking the looks of it. Next up, we've got Virus Beetle, 1 black and 1 for a 1/1 artifact creature insect. When this creature enters, each opponent discards a card. This is a pretty cool card. We've seen this many times before. It's basically just another iteration of Burglar Rat, but the fact that this counts as an artifact is super important in this set in particular, because there will be a lot of artifact synergies, a lot of ways to get value off of either going wide with artifacts or sacking artifacts, so it being an artifact just incidentally does make it more valuable than it might seem on the surface. We've also got Depressurize, 1 black and 1 for an instant. Target creature gets -3/-0 until end of turn. Then if that creature's power is 0 or less, destroy it. This is really, really interesting. So if you hit something super big, you're maybe using it as a combat trick to block their thing and kill it in combat without your thing dying, or maybe just block without your thing dying in general, or maybe just to take 3 less damage so you can live another turn and try to find a more permanent removal source. But also being able to kill anything that has 3 or less power is kind of interesting. It makes it feel a little bit like Cut Down, although it costs 2 mana, so it's not really Cut Down. Not in any way, shape, or form is it as good as Cut Down. But it is still an instant, and I think it is going to be somewhat versatile. It's nice that it can kill like 3/4s, 3/5, 3/6, 3/7s. Anything that's got 3 power is just gonna die. I think that's really cool. It's a really interesting twist on removal that we haven't really seen yet, and I'm excited to see like how good this actually ends up being. The last card here is Hilderblade, an artifact equipment for 1 black mana. Equipped creature gets +3/+1, but it equips for 4 mana, which is a lot. That being said, it has this void ability, so at the beginning of your end step, if a non-land permanent left the battlefield this turn, or a spell was warped this turn, attach this equipment to target creature you control. So at the end of your turn, you get to equip it basically for free, as long as something left the battlefield or something was warped. I actually think that's really cool. You get this out turn 1 for just 1 black mana, and it just sits there, and for the rest of the game, every single time something dies on your turn or something gets warped on your turn, you end up getting to attach this for free at the end of turn. I think there's definitely some value to be had in this, getting these free equips, getting a whopping +3/+1 on something that only ever cost you 1 mana. Sure, it's going to be better in certain builds where you're building around, constantly sacrificing permanents or constantly playing lots of warp creatures, things like that. But even outside of that, I think just incidentally being able to equip it for free every now and then might be good enough for at least to be considered as like your 22nd, 23rd card in Limited. But let's move on. Next up, we've got Biosynthetic Burst. 1 green and 1 for an instant. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It gains Reach, Trample, and Indestructible until end of turn. Untap it. This card is super useful as a trick, even if you're whether you're defending or you're attacking. If you're attacking, the Trample is going to be super relevant. If you're defending, the Reach could be super relevant. And it gets a little bit better on defense as well because your opponent's not going to see it coming at all because you get to untap the creature. That Indestructible is going to matter in combat no matter what. And even if you are using it aggressively, swinging in, they're trying to block and kill your dude, and so you use it as a trick on your guy that's swinging, untapping it is still kind of good because you get to hold it up as a blocker on their turn as well. So there is a lot of value to be had in this card if you play it just right. Should be a really good addition to limited decks. Next up, we have Diplomatic Relations. 1 green and 2 for an instant. Target creature gets +1/+0 and gains Vigilance until end of turn. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature and opponent controls. The Vigilance is really interesting. The instant speed means you could use this on your opponent's turn if you're desperate and just need to kill a thing, although it's less likely you can make use of the +1 power in that case, at least in combat, and it's definitely unlikely, impossible I should say, to make the Vigilance matter in that case. But it's cool that you do have the option of pivoting and using it that way, even though it's obviously meant to be used, you know, prior to combat. Give your guy Vigilance so that it can swing in after killing their blocker and then get in for damage and then still have a blocker yourself. So pretty interesting trick. It's going to be used in a lot of different ways, I feel. And the last card here is Lash Whip Predator, a 5/7 plant beast for 2 green and 4. That's a whopping 6 mana, but it does have Reach. And the part that makes it really good is this spell costs 2 less to cast if your opponents control 3 or more creatures. I actually think this card is super, super good in Limited. It's when your opponent has 3 or more creatures that they've gone wide that you need to get something like this down earlier at only 4 mana. So if they don't have a lot of creatures, you kind of don't mind waiting until you get to 6, but having this in your hand means you sort of have a panic button. So if your opponent does starting to go super wide and just is kind of winning the tempo race against you, putting too much pressure on you, now all of a sudden they unlock the cost reduction here. This thing can come down, shore up your defenses, and prevent them from being able to swing in any meaningful way. It is a huge body even on the ground, and the fact that it has Reach means it's even super hard for your opponent's flyers, their spacecraft, whatever, to get in past this guy. So I kind of love this. I think most people are going to look at this cost reduction and think that, oh, how often is that going to happen? If this thing's only, 6 mana, it's too expensive. I think they're really going to overlook how relevant it is because it only really matters that you can get it out that much earlier in games where your opponent is getting too much board presence. So I actually think the more you think about this card, the better it is. And I think it's going to be a really important card in Limited. But next up, we've got Fungal Colossus, a 5/5 fungus beast for 1 green and 6. That's a whopping 7 mana. This spell costs X less to cast, where X is the number of differently named lands you control, which is kind of interesting. So if you have just 6 different lands, completely different lands out, this will only cost 1 green mana. This is the card, one of the cards that Maro teased in his teaser a while back, that had that line of text, which is kind of interesting. But it's worth noting that even if you only have 4 differently named lands out, say on turn 4, you can still play this as a 3-drop, a 5/5 for 3 on turn 4, and you can actually play, another 1-drop, have some kind of a trick or something like that. Seems kind of cool. So as a common, I actually think this is okay. It's obviously nothing crazy. It's not going to make the cut in most constructed decks or anything like that. But in Limited, at least as a common, something that you can pick up pretty easily late in a draft, I actually think this is pretty decent. Next up, we've got Ice Cave Crasher, a 4/4 beast with trample for 1 green and 3. This is very, very well costed. Very efficiently costed for what it is already, but it has a landfall trigger. Whenever a land you control enters, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So this thing's usually going to be a 5/4 trample swinging in that only ever costs you 4. I actually think that's a really good stat line for a common specifically. One of the better commons that we've seen for sure when it comes to just straight up putting pressure on the board. And sometimes you're going to get to take advantage of that landfall trigger multiple times in the same turn, whether you're building up a collection of lander tokens or you have some other spells that put multiple lands into play. We've already seen a few of those in this set so far, so I think Ice Cave Crasher is pretty rad. And then the last card here is Hemosymbic Might, a 1/1 Might for 1 green mana, and whenever this creature becomes tapped, another target creature you control gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is this creature's power. So this is a really, really good card to get out on turn 1 and start to pile counters on in like a Counters Matters deck. And we actually have seen a bunch of cards that care about counters in this set. We already got a bunch in Final Fantasy. I think a Counters Matters deck is going to be super good in Standard moving forward. My Genova deck, Golgari Genova deck's already pretty nuts. I think I've mentioned that a few different times in the videos. I think this could, if it has the right support, slot in decently well into a deck like that, pile up a bunch of counters, and then when this thing swings as a big creature itself, because you put a bunch of counters on it, it's also going to make something else like that much bigger. It could get really, really crazy. It's also going to be pretty good and limited, I think, because even if you don't have ways to like super efficiently use this, as long as you have some ways in your deck, even if it's just like combat tricks that temporarily boost something, you can still get more value. At the end of the day, it's just a 1-drop, so if your opponent ends up using removal on it, it's not going to feel too bad. So there's a lot to like about the Might here. I do want to point out that when Morrow did his teaser, he mentioned that Might was a creature type, and I think everyone, including myself, was hoping and praying that they wouldn't bring back the poison mites from Phyrexia, and thank God that's not the case. It's just a normal Might. Crisis averted. Let's move on. Next up, we've got Shattered Wings. This is another one that we actually already saw in an earlier video. 3 mana to destroy an artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying, but you get to surveil one in the process, which is pretty cool. We also got Larval Scoutlander here, which is another one that we saw in a previous video. 1 green and 2 for a 3/3 artifact spacecraft with flying once you get to 7+ charge counters. But even initially, before you start to station it, when it enters, you can sacrifice a land or lander and search for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So it kind of feels sort of like a Harrow, but like I pointed out in the old video, like you can flicker this to get extra value, you can sacrifice it to beseech the mirror, things like that. There's a lot of extra value you can get out of this just being an artifact, even if you don't ever care about it being a creature. And the last card here is one that we haven't seen yet. This is Melstrider's Resolve. 1 green mana for an enchantment aura. Enchant creature you control. When this aura enters, enchanted creature fights up to 1 target creature an opponent controls. Enchanted creature gets +0/+2 and can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. So it gets to keep that forever. It gets the 2 toughness boost and can't be blocked by more than 1 creature forever. If you put this on a menace creature, it becomes unblockable, while also being a fight spell for just 1 mana. Like, getting to remove their biggest threat and make your menace dude unblockable just seems nuts to me. This is like the final card that makes me definitely want to go back to building some kind of a menace tribal deck in Standard. We've already seen 1 or 2 really good menace creatures in this set, and we've gotten a bunch of them over the course of the last few sets, but building an actual straight up menace tribal deck in Standard just hasn't quite been there. I think it might be now, especially if even more menace creatures get added into the mix. I think a card like this could make a deck like that just kind of crazy. But let's move on. Next up, we've got Close Encounter, which is another one we've already seen in the past video. 2 mana instant. As an additional cost, you choose a creature you control or a warped creature you own in exile, and then you deal damage equal to the power of the chosen creature to target creature. Then we've got Sammy's Curiosity. 1 green mana for a sorcery. You gain 2 life and create a lander token. I actually really like this, gaining a little bit of extra life in the early game against aggro to make up for not necessarily creating board presence, but still giving yourself the ability to later on color fix or ramp when the situation's right for it, when you don't have to worry about keeping pace with your opponent's board. Just seems great. As a common, I think this is a really great way to fix your mana base. And like I said, maybe just ramp up to some heavy, expensive spells while still being able to kind of mitigate some of the damage you're taking from aggro early on. The next card here, the last card of this batch, is Broodguard Elite, 2 green and X for a 0/0 Insect Knight. Will this make the cut in Knight Tribal? We'll find out. This creature enters with X +1/+1 counters on it, and when this creature leaves the battlefield, you put its counters on target creature you control. You can warp it for just 1 green and X. This actually seems really, really good. If you were to spend, say, 4 total mana to warp this in, it comes in as a 3/3. It can station something for 3 right away and put 3 charge counters on something. You could use a fight spell on it or something like that. But I think it's worth mentioning the station because you don't have to spend any extra mana on that. You're going to want to put all of your mana into the warp if you can. So station something for 3, and then at the end of turn when this leaves play, you get to put those 3 counters on whatever you want. And then next turn, you could kind of just do exactly the same thing. Pay maybe the 5 mana, have this come into play as a 3/3 again, and it's going to stay as a 3/3. And if your opponent removes it with removal, then you also still get the counters. So there's actually a lot of versatility in what this can do, and you need to kind of take into account the fact that these warp creatures, even though they don't have haste, there are ways to use the bodies, and they're always going to be best when you're finding ways to use the bodies. So the fact that this exists as a mechanic within a set that also has these station spacecraft everywhere, that is something you can use a body for, even if you don't have haste, is super important. And I think the best warp decks or spacecraft decks are going to be decks that are doing both of those things at the same time. That's just speculation at this point. I think it'll definitely be true in Limited. Harder to say for Standard, but I'm excited to find out. Next up, we've got what I think is the last batch of these commons and uncommons before we get to the rares. First up, we've got Tapestry Warden, which is another one we've seen in previous videos. A 3/4 Vigilance Artifact Creature Robot Soldier for 1 green and 3. Each creature with toughness greater than its power assigns combat damage equal to its toughness. Each creature you control with toughness greater than its power is able to station with its power, or station rather with its toughness instead of its power. So pretty interesting. Maybe toughness matters. We'll finally get there. Could be kind of good for stationing spacecraft really quick if you build cleverly around it. We've also got Germinating Worm here, a 5/5 plant worm for 1 green and 4. When this creature enters, you gain 2 life, but it also warps for 2 mana. So for 2 mana, put this into play, maybe use it to station a spacecraft 5, which is not nothing, and also gain 2 life. And then later on, you can still just play it as a 5/5 for 5 that gains you another 2 life. So there is a lot to like about this. The 2 life helps, mitigate not having board presence that stays forever. But if you have a spacecraft that you can station with this, 5 is an awful lot to be able to station for only 2 mana, and that could be a really relevant playline, especially in Limited. The last card here is Biosynthetic Burst. 1 green and 1 for an instant, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It gains Reach, Trample, and Indestructible until end of turn, untap it. We already saw this. We already saw this in one of the other batches earlier on. It's a cool card, but we don't really need to talk about it again. But that does it for all of the commons and the uncommons. Let's dive into the rares. So we've got 3 different rares that haven't been covered in official spoilers to go over here, and they're all looking kind of crazy. First of all, we have Loading Zone, an enchantment for 1 green and 3. If 1 or more counters will be put on a creature, spacecraft, or planet you control, twice that many of each of those kinds of counters are put on it instead, and then it can warp in for 1 green mana. I actually think this is deceptively good. I think it's going to look like a big 4 mana do nothing to a lot of people that's just too slow to really take advantage of. But getting to double literally all of your counters is nuts, and getting to take advantage of this a little bit earlier in the game by warping it in is going to be super relevant, I think. If you've got things lined up to put a bunch of counters on stuff, all you have to do is pay 1 mana to just double all of the counters you're getting for the rest of the turn, whether it's Genova, or some of the Hydras we've seen, or some of the crazy landfall trigger stuff like Saz's Chocobo. There's so many different ways to get value off of counters right now. I think warping this in for 1 mana and just getting a metric ton of counters for that turn is great, and then it still sits in exile later on, can be played for 4 when you have a little bit more breathing room and can actually drop it, and you can continue to double all of your counters every turn after that. So because of the warp, I actually think this card's going to be good. I think most people are going to look at it and think 4 mana is too much, it doesn't matter, the warp's 1 turn, it's not going to matter, who cares. But I actually think 1 mana, double all the counters you get until end of turn, and then still have an enchantment that gives you value later on afterwards. All of that taken into account together is actually going to be super relevant. So I'm excited to use this for sure. I'm definitely going to be building a counters deck. I've already talked about the Jenova deck that I have too many times. I need to shut up about the Jenova deck, but I can't help it. I love it. I'm having so much fun with it, and this card would fit super well in a deck like that. Next up, we've got Space-Time Anomaly. This is the second of the 3rd leaked rares, a sorcery for 4 mana in the colors of Azorius, 1 blue, 1 white, and 2. Target player mills cards equal to your life total. So we already saw in the Final Fantasy set, last set, we got Hope Estheim, and Hope makes it so that you make an opponent mill cards whenever you gain life, and he has lifelink, and this just seems to double down on that concept. I truly think that now that we've seen this card, we might be on the precipice of seeing some kind of crazy new life gain mill where it's completely impossible to kill your opponent quick with like an aggro deck because they're just ramping up their life constantly, and then they're also just milling you out with all of that life gain. That seems super relevant to me, and I'm kind of scared. Is Hope and this card by themselves enough to make, you know, an archetype like that relevant in Standard? Hard to say until it's tested, but I will say this: if we get any other cards whatsoever that seem to support this and seem to be playable, I do think that that archetype is going to be a real thing and terrifying, because I hate mills so much, guys. I can't stand it. Let me know how you feel in the comments. Do you think this is just win more? Is it too much? Does it not matter? Let me know. But next up, we have the very last of the leaked cards. This is Famished Worldsire. This is a mythic, guys. A 0/0 Leviathan with Ward 3 for a whopping 8 mana, 3 green and 5, which is a lot. But it has Devour Land 3, so as this creature enters, you may sacrifice any number of lands. It enters with 3 times that many +1/+1 counters on it. Kind of nuts. It's utilizing all of the ramp and lander tokens and stuff like that that we've seen so far, but it's also kind of tilting in the direction of like a counters matters style deck, getting a whole bunch of counters itself and potentially fueling some of those synergies. But then it has this other ability. When this creature enters, you look at the top X cards of your library, where X is this creature's power. Put any number of land cards from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So you effectively get the ability to replace all of the lands that you devoured with new lands. Now granted, they do enter tapped, so you're not going to be able to cheat a bunch of mana this way, although theoretically you could hit more lands than you even sacrificed, because you're getting 3 counters for every land you sacrifice, and therefore looking at 3 cards for each land that you sacrifice. So if you on average hit 1.5, say 1 every other card, let's just say on average you hit 1 in every 3 of those cards, but somewhere along the line you hit an extra 1 or 2. You're going to actually have more land than you started with. You're going to ramp. It's also worth noting that it's going to trigger all of your landfall triggers. So maybe you use this as the top end of your landfall deck, where you're just doing all the normal landfall stuff. Maybe it's Chocobo stuff. Maybe it uses Tifa and going nuts. And then once you hit 8 mana from your ramping to trigger your landfall anyway, you just jam this out, sack all your lands, replace them with a bunch of lands, get an insane amount of landfall triggers, and have this giant Ward 3 behemoth on your side. I do feel like this is going to be the top end of some kind of new ramp constructed deck. I don't know if it's going to be good enough. It's hard to say without seeing the entire set, but it's absolutely going to be a thing worth trying. I think this card just looks kind of nuts when you really think about the play lines and just the ways that you can abuse it. It just seems like it's going to be pretty crazy. But that's going to do it for all of the leaks, at least. I do have a ton more spoilers on the way when we do our official day 2 spoiler video, and that's going to cover all of the actual official leaked cards coming from Wizards of the Coast on day 2. That'll be the rest of everything that gets spoiled for the rest of the day. So look forward to that coming later on today. If you haven't already, check out my spoiler playlist for Edge of Eternities, because we have all of the leaks, all of the official spoilers, everything that's come out so far is covered in that playlist in multiple videos. That's linked in the description and in the comments. Check it out. Like, subscribe, do the thing. So much more is on the way. This set's looking crazy. I'll see you later. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck text, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.